Hi everyone, welcome to GT Coding. In this video, we'll create a custom radio button. So here's the radio button that we are going to design in this video. Here's the active state of the radio button. And when we click on another radio button, we can see we have this smooth transition from inactive to active state. And you can also make customizations like the color and the border size and all those things. Let's go ahead and start by creating an index.html file. So let me just create a new file, index.html, and we'll also create one more file called style.css. Alright, let's start with the HTML. So first of all, we will write some basic HTML5 boilerplate. So for that, in VS Code you have to just type exclamation and press tab, and you will get this HTML5 boilerplate code. And we'll just change this title to custom radio button. Alright, in the body we need to have a heading. So just create an h1 and we will type please select your OS. And then we'll create a division for containing all the radio buttons. So radio container, and in that we'll create an input with the type of radio, and we'll also give it an ID of Windows for the first one, and then we'll create a label for Windows, and in here we'll type Windows. Alright, now we'll just copy these two lines of code and we'll paste it two more times, and here we will type Mac and Macintosh over here. Here we'll type Mac as well, and here we'll type Linux, and Linux here as well. So our HTML is pretty much complete. We'll just open it with live server, and here we can see our radio buttons. If we click on any one of these, we can select one of these radio buttons, but we have a problem over here where all the radio buttons can be selected at once, and we also have a typo over here. We'll just change this to Linux. Since all our radio buttons can be selected at once, we need to have an attribute called name, and we need to give the same name attribute to all these three radio buttons. So we'll just create name OS, and we'll just copy this from here and we'll paste it over here and here. And now if we select one of these, we can see that only one of these radio button is selected. Alright, so we'll also link our CSS over here, link style.css. Now we'll start with the styling of our radio buttons. The first thing we'll do is remove all the margins. So we'll create a universal selector and we'll type margin 0, and we'll give some styling to the body. So height of 100 viewport height, display of flex, and flex direction of column, and we are using display flex over here to center it vertically and horizontally on our screen, and we will give it a background color of light gray, and align items to the center and justify content to the center. So we have our content in the center. Give it a font family of Roboto Thin and sans serif. If you don't have this font installed on your system, this won't work, so you have to use Google Fonts for this. I have a video on using Google Fonts, so you can watch that. Alright, so the next thing is we'll style the h1, and for the h1 we'll give a margin of 48 pixels and a font size of 32 pixels. Text transform to uppercase, and we'll also give it some letter spacing of 8 pixels, and we'll also align it to the center. Now we'll give some styling to the radio container. and for that we'll give a font size of 24 pixels, padding of 8 pixels. Now what we'll do is hide the actual radio button from here, and we'll create our own radio buttons. So we'll type input of type radio, and we'll say display to none. So our radio buttons have disappeared. Now we'll give some styling to the label, and we'll set the position to relative. And we are setting the position to relative for the label because we want to have the radio buttons positioned relative to the label. And then we'll have cursor to pointer, font weight to bold, and padding right to 32 pixels. So let me just go to the inspector, and if you hover over this radio container, we can see we have this padding right for all these labels, and even for the last label we have the padding right. So we don't want to have the padding right for the last label, so we'll remove the padding right. So we'll create a new selector, and we'll type label nth last child, and here we'll type padding right of 0. Now if you go to the inspector, we can see we don't have the padding right for the last label. Alright, so now let's go ahead and create our radio buttons. So we'll be using the after and before selectors for this. So let's go ahead and type label : before, and for before and after we need to have a content property. So we'll type content, and we'll just leave it blank, and then we'll give it a border of 2 pixels solid dark gray, and we'll set the display to inline block, and we'll set the width to 30 pixels and the height to 30 pixels. Now we'll give it a margin of -8 pixels and 20 pixels, and also a margin left of 0, and we want to make it round, so we'll just type border radius of 50%. Alright, that's our inactive radio button over there. Now let's design the active state. So we'll type label after, and even for the after we need to have a content, and we'll set the display to inline block, and the position to absolute, and we'll set the width to 20 pixels and the height to 20 pixels, and we'll get a background color of red just to see it. And now we have to position it correctly, so we'll type left 7 pixels, top of 12 pixels, and we'll also give it a margin of -8 pixels and 20 pixels, and a margin left of 0. Alright, now we have it in the center. We'll also give it a border radius of 50%. Right, this is our active state. Now we need to have a dark gray color for the active state, so this will be the active state. But when it is inactive, we want to set the opacity to 0. So what we'll do is we'll change the color to RGBA, which contains the alpha channel. So if you hover over the color in VS Code, we have this extension over here, and if we click on this top bar over here, we can change the color styles. So we'll select it to RGB, and we'll just reduce the opacity to 0. So here we can see the opacity has been reduced to 0, and we'll also add a transition of all to 0.4 seconds. Now the last thing to do is when we click on any of these, we want to change the opacity to 1. So we'll just copy this from here, and and here we will type input, type radio, and when it is checked, we want to change the background color of the after of the label. So the label is beside our input, so we have to type plus over here, and we'll type label colon colon after, and we'll just paste the background color over here, and we'll change this opacity to 1. So now let's see whether it works. So if we click on Windows, we have this radio button selected, and if we click on Macintosh, we have the other one selected, and even the transition is working alright. Alright, that's it for this video. If you have any doubts, you can ask in the comments below, and I will also leave the link for the source code in the description. And also don't forget to subscribe to this channel to get the latest video notifications. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a nice day.